And Carl,
Hey, how's it going?
you were in the back, and you're saying, I have to pronounce your name correct. Are you ready? Leduc. Did I do
That's
it?
perfect. Yeah, that's perfect.
Sweet.
Good
Okay,
job.
cool, man. So what do you got for us today? What are you going to share with us?
So, I mean, Kelsey's talk, I think, hit on a lot of the same points, but I guess the angle that I'm coming from is from an indie developer perspective. Maybe there's a small team that needs production support, or someone that's just starting out needs to understand what a producer can solve on the project, and that's kind of the angle that I'll take. But Kelsey's talk was great, and I liked a lot of the points she talked about.
Me too. I think it's really cool. So here's my big word for the day, segue. So we'll segue right into yours on the development. So I'm going to go ahead and share your presentation, and you got it, Carl Leduc. I'm just kidding with you. Have a good one. I'll see you in a bit.
Thanks, Michael. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much, Geekle, for having me on. I'm really excited to give this talk today. So, production advice for when you have no producer. What I'm going to talk about today is a little introduction of myself and my history, and also just a bit of background as to like definitions of what a producer is. Kelsey's talk touched on, all the different types of responsibilities that a producer can have, and I'll be talking about all those different things as well, but specializing in project management, which is where my experience really focuses on. I'll be talking about the main pillars that I feel producers or production managers bring to a project, and that's communication, motivation, and direction. So let's get into it. I hope you find this valuable. So who am I? My name is Carl Leducq. I am currently a production coordinator, a mid-level production coordinator at Rocketworks, working on a new survival game called Icarus. We actually just had our first open beta weekend last weekend, and we're set to have a launch in November. It's really exciting. It's awesome working on a survival project. Different genres of games require different problems to be solved. So I hope the advice that I give today is broad enough to be valuable to people coming from all different areas of games, different genres, different platforms, and that kind of thing. My game dev journey started off in 2014, where I got an internship as a QA tester at Gameloft Auckland. We were developing mobile games there. I had a great experience working as a QA tester for a year, and then I transitioned into the production department. And that's when I really fell in love with games and saw my future as someone that really loved the skill set that was needed for the production department and being a producer. So my journey kind of continued on from that, where I worked at Weta Workshop in Wellington, New Zealand, as a QA tester there on Magic Leap, on a game called Dr. Broadbort's for the Magic Leap device, which is an augmented reality headset, which was a really, really cool experience. And even though I was there as a QA tester, I still learned a lot working with a different team, different tools. It was cool to go from working on mobile to working on a different platform, and that was a great experience. And now being at Rocketworks, working on a PC game, it's kind of giving me a good all-round experience of what it's like to develop games on different platforms with different size teams. Rocketworks has about 65 plus people right now, and it's really exciting. There's 3 producers on the team, 3 production coordinators, a couple production assistants, and it's a nice production department that kind of covers all the different areas, from design to the programmers to the artists, and I'm currently sitting on the artists team as a production coordinator. Some other things that I do on the side is I sit on the board of the NZGDA, which is the New Zealand Game Developers Association, and through this I've had a chance to talk to a lot of indie developers, help with funding, early stage funding, and just kind of networking with people that are just going through the game development journey early on and seeing what that growth looks like. And I think that's why I wanted to do this talk today with this angle, is because I've realized that I've kind of understood, even though I'm not a programmer and I'm not a developer, I've realized that producers always need to be hired earlier and earlier on projects, and It's it's obviously it's hard if you're only an indie developer working on your own or with a small team. But I hope I can explain a few of the pillars that would explain the kind of value that a producer can bring. The other side thing that I do is I host a weekly podcast called Zero to Play, where I interview different game developers and game experts in the industry all around the world. And I've had the pleasure of interviewing several indie developers that I've found through LinkedIn and Twitter, and being able to talk to them about their journey, their struggles, things like that. And it's been a great resource for me to ask these questions and to kind of learn a bit more what goes inside the minds of these indie developers that are pursuing their passion. And I highly recommend, if you need a great piece of content to consume, to kind of learn more about other people's stories and things, I definitely recommend checking out the podcast on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all that. It's one of my most passionate side hustles, and I'm definitely really loving the value that I'm getting from that, just from talking to different people around the world in different roles. So that's a bit about me. Now let's talk a bit about what it is to be a producer. So similar to what Kelsey mentioned, there's all these different things depending on the project, depending on the size of the team, depending on the different department that the producer is working in, that they'll have all these different types of responsibilities. So publishing, working with a publisher, funding, trying to raise capital, distribution, working with different platforms, hiring and growing a team, marketing, project management, and there's a lot more. And I'm learning in my journey the different kinds of responsibilities that a producer has. But project management is definitely the one that I've focused on the most, and that I've had the joy of learning the most of, and that's where I feel I can talk about the most confidently. So the next question I have is why don't you have a producer? And if you've come to listen to this talk, you might not have a producer, and there's several reasons why that might be. The project might be too small, it might be too early, so you haven't had to think about that yet. There's enough money to afford one, which is a very valid problem to have. When you have limited money, you have to make really smart decisions as to where that goes. Maybe you don't see the value in having one. That's something I hope to change your mind about by the end of this talk. Maybe you've had a bad experience with a producer that hasn't done what you've expected, or brought as much value to the team as you thought. Or maybe you just don't want one. Maybe you feel like those responsibilities are being taken care of by another member of the team. Maybe it's yourself, and maybe that's completely fine. And I'll be talking about some of the pillars that I think will hopefully be on the shoulders of someone in your team, even if that's yourself. So that's what I'm going to talk about. The pillars of being a good producer, in my opinion, from a production management perspective. So there's a few caveats there, but I hope there's some value sprinkled in here somewhere. So the first one, and this is probably the biggest one that is constantly, there's just so many lessons that you can learn from this as you go through your journey. I'm learning about this every day, but that's communication, and just communicating with the team, the best processes for communicating. And it seems like a very simple thing. Everyone can communicate. Most people feel like they communicate well, but I do feel like there's a lot to unpack with what good communication really means. So I've drawn these little diagrams to try help explain how big of a problem communication can be. So the first case is you have a team, from one developer to another developer. Let's say one programmer to another programmer. They need to communicate to each other about, maybe they're working on a system that's quite closely linked, and they need to make sure the code doesn't overlap, or whatever it might be. They need to communicate, and a producer can help facilitate those conversations. even if it's a remote team, maybe a producer needs to help plan a meeting to get that conversation going. But maybe they don't need a producer involved. They can just go talk to each other, jump into a Discord channel or something and sort it out, which is perfectly fine. But one-on-one communication can happen between different departments as well, and a producer is sometimes a good middleman to help put those two people together and talk about a problem. The next case is from one department to another, and once the team starts growing and once you have established pods of different departments, whether it's marketing or the art department, the animation department, the world builders, the level designers, or the designers and the programmers, the backend team, there's so many different departments that you need to develop a game. It's not a simple it's not a simple thing, and games can be very complex. And once you have this interdepartment communication needed, things like documentation become really important. Just being on top of the kind of problems that one department might be causing for another, if there's bottlenecks and things like that. So that's another case that I feel communication can break down, where there can be a lot of value created by having someone on the team that's thinking about this stuff. And the third one is communication between one person to another, but at a different point in time. And this is, I think, one area that isn't really thought about a lot. And that's, for example, a year ago, a feature in the game was developed by a programmer. And a year later, that programmer has now left the company, and that feature needs to be picked up and iterated on. It needs to be improved or changed. And a developer is going to go into that system, and they might be confused as to how it was developed, what the intention was when it was first made. And you need to have good processes with documentation, capturing that data back then a year ago, so that a year later, when someone's trying to, not repeat the same problems that the person had a year ago, is to have good processes that point to documentation that's really well written, and that documentation is up to date and things like that. And this presents a whole bunch of problems once you scale a team, once you have a project that's been in development for a long time. These kinds of communication problems happen often. And a producer's job is all about trying to keep the team organized and keep things like this not causing too much of an issue. So I hope that made some sense. In terms of making communication easier, one great solution is documents. Documents are a team's most efficient tool for communication, in my opinion. What I think it does is it removes the responsibility from a person and being stuck in their head to being responsible by a whole team. So anyone else can jump in, anyone else can provide feedback, can give advice, can change things, and create discussion in amongst that document, so that there's a source of truth that people can go to from different teams. And I think it's really important that it can be shared. It's like a piece of paper or a document online that is detached from one sole person, which is, I think, the main benefit of having documentation. And you have documentation for everything, for meetings, talking about design scope, different systems, art style, onboarding when there's new people coming on board. Honestly, there's so many things that a document can solve so much headache when trying to remember things that have been discussed or problems that have been solved. But what is really important is the file structure and organization. One good tip is to have good templates for different documents. If you have an onboarding document, to have a good template that you're giving to that lead artist to lay out in an organized way, so that anyone else jumping in can kind of understand that template, and there's like a starting point for them to go off to put that information out there. So yeah, documentation is really important. So a producer's job is to know what documents exist, where they live, and if they're up to date. And this is just one of the things that is a constant job that a producer or a production manager is trying to do, is to be the source of truth that knows where everything is, and if there isn't a document that exists, that will then be a gap in their mind that they want to fill. And that's ultimately what I'm passionate about as an aspiring producer, is being that person that can be a point of contact to solve all those little communication problems and make sure that there's things like documents being created and followed through with and things like that. The next thing to help with communication, in my opinion, is meetings. So meetings are the next best way to kind of solve problems quickly. The big problem with meetings, though, is that you're taking all these people's time away to solve the problem, and there's a big problem with meeting bloat, where developers feel like they're just constantly in meetings, they're not actually doing focused work. And I do think that is something that a producer should be conscious about, is always making sure they're not taking too much time, not wasting the time of their developers by pulling them into meetings all the time. Also, what I think is important is to focus on capturing the decisions that are made during those meetings, not discussion. Sometimes discussions can go for hours to talk about different things, and you kind of hop between different ideas, but it's whatever the decisions that are made at the end of that I think are really important to capture. And a good piece of advice is to always end in action items, end with a task that can then be followed through, whether it's a document to be created or to go follow up with a different team, or even just to like put those facts out somewhere. Another important part about meetings is taking notes in the meetings. Sharing notes with the team in case some people aren't there, so they can still get that information and be on the same page as everyone if they're not present at that meeting at that time. So sharing notes from meetings, I think, is really important. And recurring meetings can also be handy if you're trying to do things like daily stand-ups or retrospectives, just to get the flow of the team being really kind of efficient and finding any issues in those regular meeting time slots. But yeah, don't be careful with too many recurring meetings that make people feel like they're wasting their time. So a producer's job is to ensure meetings are scheduled, notes are taken, and action items are converted into tasks. So these are some of the things that I am responsible for at RocketWorks, and what I think a producer's job is in the production team. And if you didn't have someone that was thinking about this stuff, it's very easy for information to be lost and time to be wasted, and for you to be going back to those meeting rooms again and again, talking about the same things. And that's not a good place to be in your project. So the second pillar that I'd like to talk about is motivation. And one thing that Kelsey mentioned in her talk before this was being a producer is like being a therapist. And this is a topic that I like to talk about a lot, because it is talking about soft skills. It is talking about caring for individual people, and making sure that people are in the right place, they have enough tasks and things like that. And I really like talking about this topic when it comes to having efficient processes. So what is motivation really? The way I like to see it is everyone in the team's working towards a goal, whether that might be the next sprint, the next feature, next update, whatever it might be. But a producer, I feel, is looking at the team at where they currently stand. No one else in the team is really caring about their neighbors to the same degree that a producer is. And I think it's really important to have someone in your team that is focusing on what that person is doing right now, and if that's the best thing for that person to be doing. Because people need to be focused on what they're working on. They need to be getting into that state of flow, and to do that, they can't be distracted by what's happening either side of them. And a producer does a perfect job of making sure that is being considered. So to help with motivation, I think a producer should be checking in with the team regularly, treating them like a human, helping them prioritize and find work. It's just these kind of things that are discussions that you have with your team that help them feel more confident about what they're currently working on. And also just looking for opportunities to shift and move the team around. Maybe someone's been working on 3D assets for the last year, and they feel kind of burnt out, not really learning or excited anymore, and maybe just switching them with someone else, having a little handover can make both people feel a lot more motivated and produce a lot more just better work. So I think that's things like that are really important when you find those moments. The other thing are regular meetings to help to motivate the team. Things like having one-on-ones to just give each member of the team a chance to talk about the areas that they are interested in, the problems that they're having on the team. Retros are great, whether they're project-based or just done on like a monthly cadence, just to find out what people are happy about, confused about, or sad about, or angry about. There's tons of different formats for retros that you can find online, but I think they're great just to get an overall snapshot of how the team is feeling at that moment in time. Things like quarterly goals to talk about what that person's currently like feeling in their project. Maybe they're in the art department, but they are working as a programmer on the side, and maybe them being a tech artist kind of in between might be a solution, and just checking in with your team to find those goals that the team are working towards, so that people are really motivated for what they're working on. And then yearly assessments. I think it's really important for people to be told if they're doing a good job or not, to be given kind of a roadmap of if they want to work their way into a senior position, like what that kind of path looks like, and being as open as you can about their career path and how they can best get to that. I think things like that are really helpful to build the motivation in the team. Producer's job is to make sure the team are taken care of and have something they can talk to about challenges, having someone they can talk to about challenges, both on the project and personally. I think that's important. If you didn't have a producer on the team or someone to kind of fill that gap, then people won't feel comfortable. They won't know who the kind of leader is or the point of contact is in that team. And sometimes having a producer is that perfect person that you can go to talk about things outside of what's directly work related. That a producer fills that void in a good way, I feel. And the third pillar is direction. So providing direction for the projects, the team, and just being conscious of the direction that the project is going in. So a good way to that I put this into a little graphic is, if you didn't have a producer and you're just kind of developing the game week by week, day by day, you're kind of just trying to find what you're building. You're not quite sure. You're making decisions and you're changing the way the game looks, but there isn't really this clear direction. And that's what I feel a producer does really well, is just kind of nails down that long-term vision and can reiterate that to the team. And that's ultimately what a producer is there to do, is to help deliver on a decision that has been made a few months back. And a producer can think long-term while thinking short-term, whereas a developer and someone that's actually writing the code or drawing the art is focused on their skill set, and they're not really thinking about the roadmap of the project. And that's another great solution that I think producers give to a project. What I think they do well is looking forward. So allocating tasks to the team on a daily basis, making sure that they have three things on their list that are the most priority right now, that they can then just kind of work through one at a time, working by 2-week sprints, and having those goals to achieve by the end of that 2 weeks, and just having that cadence of delivering big chunks of the game at a time in 2-week sprints, I think is really valuable. And then also just thinking more long term, quarterly planning, seeing if you need to hire anyone to fill in those gaps to deliver in that time, things like that. A producer provides a lot of valuable insight on. They also do good at looking back. So making sure the backlog is being prioritized, I think, is really important, so that it's not so overwhelming. If someone's got no tasks and they decide to go into the backlog to see any bugs that they can fix, that it's not just this big ocean of tickets, that it's being prioritized and looked at, so that the producer on the team is hopefully making time to go and make sure that that is at least considered, even though there might not be time. It's a fact that all games ship with hundreds of bugs in the backlog. Developing games, a polished game, is hard work and takes a very long time. But prioritizing the backlog is something that helps just make the overall process feel a lot cleaner and more efficient for the team to work with. Organizing documentation, so not just kind of letting things just pile up, but actually making sure things are ordered as the team grows, as the project matures, to make sure that things like documentation are organized, and doing things like retros, documenting the lessons that you learned about different features or different projects or different teams, and realizing the pros and cons that you learned so that you can do better for the next iteration or the next next chapter of that team. And then looking at the present, so doing things like daily stand-ups, making sure the team are motivated on a daily basis, team morale, and just making sure the team are working well together, and just improving processes. I think things like this really help in the long term when there's someone on a daily basis that's taking care of the processes and the efficiency of the team, and can make those little micro changes that help the team out on a daily basis. A producer's job is to make sure the team is as efficient as possible and that processes are put in place to help hit the deadlines and move the project forward. So that's pretty much it. I hope that this helps you understand some of the value that a producer can bring to a project. So if you're listening to this and you're an indie developer, you're maybe growing your team, maybe you just got funding and you need to kind of expand and you're not quite sure the kind of responsibilities and roles that a producer could fill, I hope that this can shine some light on things like communication, motivation, and direction, and to show the importance of that in a team, and as a studio is growing, the kind of things that should be responsible by someone on the team. It doesn't have to be a producer. I think the name of a producer or production manager, whatever you want to call it, it can fall on someone else's shoulders that might have a different responsibility in the team as well. For example, they could be like a lead developer, but they do have those production tendencies. I think that is perfectly fine with a small enough team, but I hope that this talk made it clear that it is a full-time job to be a producer and to have someone that's focusing solely on things like communication and the processes on a day-to-day basis. Because if you're also trying to be the lead developer, lead programmer, you will very quickly, that those kind of things will be pushed to the side. They won't be as important. They won't seem as important in the moment, but they do make a big difference for the longevity of the project, to reduce burnout, to reduce overtime, and finding things last minute that you need to fix. So the last point that I want to make, though, is to not be so hard on yourself, because every producer is constantly having to adapt and change to a growing team, a maturing project, new projects, having to balance multiple projects. It's a constant work in progress, and there's no one solution for every team. Even a producer is constantly changing the way that they feel about different processes, different ways of organizing information. So if it is on your shoulders, don't be so hard on yourself if things fall through the cracks, if if you find that things like time is wasted sometimes. Just know that even on the biggest projects with producers at every corner, they still have areas that they can improve on. So thanks for your time. I really appreciate being able to talk about some of these things that I'm really passionate about. My Twitter is Carl's Content if you want to keep in touch. I'd love to know if you found anything valuable from this talk. I'm going to be posting a thread which summarizes this talk in the next few days on my Twitter. So yeah, I'd love it if you could join me over there and keep the conversation going. So thanks again, and yeah, see you guys soon for the Q&A.
Right now, how about now? Thanks, Carl. That was so awesome. I'm gonna bring in Kelsey also. Guys, let's just get this started. Where do I start? We'll get to the questions in a minute. I just want to let you know the information that you provided, and I heard the word communication, right? I mean, between your team, and I see you nodding your head. Just go ahead and how important is communication between the team?
It's as easy as just walking over to someone's desk to solve a problem and to be confident enough to just ask the right questions. But I think, especially if you're dealing with bigger issues on the project, to make sure that those things are documented after they're communicated is really important, so that that information isn't just kept between two people. It can be communicated to the wider team so that everyone's on the same page. Yeah, communication is both the simplest thing and the most complicated thing at the same time.
Right. Kelsey, you want to add to that?
I mean, it couldn't be more important. I think. And you spend your entire day doing it if you're a producer. So keeping it clear, making sure everyone is speaking the same language is sometimes just a big part of it. And I completely agree. It's as simple as saying hi, going and just checking in, making sure everyone's moving towards the same goal.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, because okay, we'll get to the questions in a minute. We keep on going into that. How has COVID impacted you guys when it comes to communication? How has that impacted you?
Yeah, I can start. New Zealand has just gone into its 5th lockdown a week ago, so all of our teams had to go remote again, and it's definitely harder, personally, I think, as a producer to facilitate conversation. I feel like when you're remote, it's easier to let people self-manage themselves. But I think things like daily stand-ups are really important, just to get the ball rolling at the beginning of the day, make sure the team comes together, knows what they're working on today, and can communicate that to the producer. Those like daily stand-ups are what I found to be the most valuable in a remote COVID world.
Kelsey?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I actually haven't left my house since last March for work.
Yeah.
So I'm very used to it now. And for us, it's a lot. There's definitely more meetings than there were before to make sure people are communicating and keeping things open. And there's just some sort of new creativity. You have to find new ways to talk to each other and like have reasons to talk that aren't always work related. You have to come up with the reasons to just chat sometimes, because that's, especially as a producer, some of the most important stuff comes out of casual conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been fun. There's a lot of Zoom. I am a professional Zoomer at this point.
Right.
But, I think overall it's very doable. You just have to put actual energy into thinking about how to keep people connected.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because when I was a lead developer on a project, we had cat show and tell day. And so everybody was showing their cat, like, hey, this is my cat. And developers went crazy. I was like, dude, really? They started like bringing out their cats, 3 and 4 of them. But it really brought a synergy to the team, and maybe a personal thing, which is important, right? It's not just, hey, let's work on this project, but hey, let's get to know each other. And I found that's very effective. And I'm sure you guys can relate to that, knowing everybody on a personal level. We could go on and on the topic here, but here's the question for you, Kelsey, and then Carl, you can step in too. I believe you mentioned this time of year isn't the busiest time for people to get picked up. Why and when is the busiest time? When is the best time?
Yeah, good question. Everyone's different, and I will say that every country is different. So this is speaking from my personal experience only. But if you're looking at certain companies that do releases in fall, at this point, we are nose down. We have too much to do, and we're not hiring people very often. It still happens, but not as extensively. Whereas there are companies that are going to be looking more beginning of the year, like first 4 months of the year, and you might see more jobs. Again, totally depends on the company and depends on what their targets are, but it is something I've seen as a trend, especially in the US.
What about you, Carl? What do you see? What's the best time in New Zealand?
I think it's interesting. The industry in New Zealand is still pretty small, and it's kind of clear when a company gets new funding and is expanding their teams. And I think just keeping in touch with local organizations that are sharing the like job boards, so that you know when that kind of rush is happening. Maybe you could even be aware of the local like funding projects that happen and find out when their cadence is for announcing new funds. But I mean, yeah, there's so many variables. It's hard to give a good, clear answer. I think it can be at any point of the year. Probably not around Christmas, maybe.
Yeah.
That's probably the clearest piece of, yeah. Other than that, it's quite hard
Yeah.
to say.
I would totally agree. I would also say track your companies, like see what if you're somewhere you're excited about, get to know what they look like and when they hire, because they probably have things like that. For example, they got funding or they got a new quarter. That's probably the best way to follow.
So it sounds like you're saying if I'm really serious about applying for a job, you got to do research, right? You've got to research the company out. Well, they're going to ask you questions, right? Like, do you have any questions for us? And it looks a lot better, doesn't it, when you're prepared, I guess. Yeah. So I guess this is kind of a duplicate. Unless you guys want to say anything, we kind of touched on that, right? Is there a best time? Let's move on. One of two. In my country, Thailand, several people and government still didn't see the importance of local game developers. You're nodding your head there, Carl. Why is that? You seem to understand.
Yeah, I mean, sitting on the board of the NZGDA, the New Zealand Game Developers Association, we're constantly trying to lobby government to, acknowledge games in their bills and things like that. And it's a constant work and progress. I think the whole world, though, is starting to accept games and see games as part of the mainstream media now, and see the benefit of games in different industries. I still think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get rid of a lot of the stigma around games. But I'm hopeful that as every year goes on, more people from different industries are seeing the value in games, especially at a government level as well. So my answer to that is be patient, find the people that are fighting for it, and join them.
Kelsey, anything to add?
I think Carl nailed it.
Yeah. I'm just trying to be, Mr. Polite here. So most game developers rarely have any budget, and sponsors or investors often doesn't understand the process of game development. You guys can read it. Any guide to support local? Is there anything out there, any community or something like that can support local game developers? Because I'm sure there's hidden talent, right? There's probably some really good talent out there. So there's something to support that.
Kelsey, you can go first if you like.
I mean, I don't have a ton of insight on this, especially compared to your experience, but I would say that there's always groups. There are angel investors. There are people who do this and focus on this. So if you feel like you want to find an investor that understands what you're pitching, do your research, as always.
Yeah, I think it's also important, just like the startup industry, it's in like the tech industry, which is similar to games in a lot of ways. The harsh reality is that 95% of projects don't succeed and don't grow past a certain point. And I think the answer is everyone is dealing with that, and it's all about finding creative ways to put yourself in front and be different. Like, what's your angle? What makes you unique? Why is now the right time? Things like that. But like I said, like other industries also struggle with that. It's hard to make a game and to grow a studio. But just keep trying. If you are really passionate about it, you might fail the first few, but the third, fourth, or fifth project might be the one that gets attention and gets funding, gets sponsorship, and that kind of thing. So if you are really passionate about it, you will end up making it work.
It sounds like passion is a good driven force, isn't it? I mean, if you have passion, that can get you over a lot of the people saying, no, you can't do it, find another job. And so this leads to the next question here. What is the degree of competition of the gaming industry? Is the graphic engine of each game proprietary and trademark and blah, blah? You guys can read it. So what is the degree of that?
Those are kind of different questions.
Yeah, it is.
as far as like competition in the games industry, it's going to just depend on what you're trying to get into and sort of at what level. I do think that it's a popular industry. So I do think a lot of people are applying for the jobs. When you see something, you can assume a handful of people have applied. As far as the graphics engine, I really can't speak to that. I would say that it completely depends game to game and situation to situation.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'd like to add is game engines like Unity and Unreal are providing a great solution to a lot of game devs that don't have the same amount of money as other studios that develop their own engines. I think Unity and Unreal are providing competition that is on par with some of the big studios. And if you are just a small guy looking at these free tools, learning Unreal, it's free to download. There's tutorials on YouTube to look at it and just know that is a tool that can be competed with some of the biggest companies in the world right now.
Yeah. Kelsey, anything you want to say to that?
No, I would agree. Yeah. It's a good note that there are lots of things out there if you're at the small level that are being used at the large level. Like it doesn't mean you don't have to have a proprietary engine to make any kind of game.
Yeah, I'm learning that too. As I'm moderating, I'm hearing some of the other speakers, and they're even getting into talking open source now. I'm sure you guys have heard a lot of it. I'm like, whoa, open source, that saved my life. Where I develop and everything. So for me, that's a lot of confidence. And before I'd be like, I'd never be a gaming developer or something like that. But a lot of these tools that are out there, right? It seems like a lot of people are giving that opportunity. Here's another question. Any tips on finding games producers, project manager jobs? Any tips?
I think for me, I can say it's going to depend a little bit, again, on location. But I know that a robust way to find them in the US is often LinkedIn. Sometimes you're going to see some things on Indeed, and then always, always, always look at the actual developer's website, because sometimes jobs are only on the actual individual developers' websites.
Yeah, I'd probably say like finding games producer / product manager jobs. I would look at entry level jobs like an assistant producer or a production assistant. Sometimes that name is interchanged. They're great entry level jobs in production that will give you a good insight into how games are developed. Being a QA tester as well, I personally, just because that's how my journey started, it was a great way to get my foot in the door to understand how all the different departments worked, which then gave me the insight into game production. And then there was an opportunity to switch departments once I was inside the studio. So I think applying for jobs as a QA tester can be another great strategy as well. But yeah, places like LinkedIn in New Zealand, there's companies like TradeMe or Seek that have jobs postings as well.
That is so super awesome. Thanks, guys. Because I'm just saying, if I was new coming in the industry, a lot of information that you provided, it's helped me to be more confident, right? In other words, just look out there and like the companies you work for, they're super big, and maybe that kind of scares me a little bit, and maybe a lot of what you provided, and I'm talking to everybody out there too. I mean, they're telling you, right, guys? They're telling you to go out there and just apply, right? And don't be afraid of whatever the company is and everything. I mean, look at you two. You're very successful, and I think you are totally awesome for being here and sharing that. Okay, that was my little speech. But anyway, let's go on. What are some entry-level production? Well, you mentioned this, Carl. What are some entry-level production positions I should be looking for? Do I need to be a specialist in a specific area? Like an artist to be an art producer, what is it that I need to be one? What are the skills?
Yeah, I can speak to this a little bit. So again, different companies are going to have different titles, but I completely agree. Associate producer is sometimes entry level. There's also coordinator positions that are sometimes entry level. Like a project coordinator is often entry level. You do not need to be a specialist in an area. If you have an interest, it's great to sort of focus. But if you don't know what you want to do, or you are excited about it but don't have a ton of experience, that's completely fine at entry level. It should be our job to teach you how to do it.
Right.
So So overall, though, it also should call it out. Like you should look at your requirements on any job, and if it's a year or less, that should be entry level.
Mm. Yeah, I think having a specialization, like say you're pursuing production, but you are also an artist at this on the side. I think that helps with communication. But at the end of the day, your skills as in production are what you're being hired for. I'm not an artist, but I've been made familiar to the art pipeline so that I can communicate with the artists on my team. It hasn't been, I can't even draw a stick man properly, but I'm able to communicate with the artists now because I understand the tools that they use and because I'm curious about that. That doesn't mean that I want to be an artist though.
Well, I'm a master at copy and paste. Whatever. Okay, anyway, I'm going to continue on really quick here. For example, can a game developer also be a game producer?
Titles are titles. I mean, like if you're a producer on the dev team, then you're a developer. Like it's pretty interchangeable. It just depends on how you use it.
Yeah, I think the definition of a game developer is something that's I think argued a bit online, but personally, I call myself a game developer even though I work in production. I'm very close to the development team. I'm not a programmer, but I do help bring the project to life. So I think everyone that is directly involved with making a game is a game developer. Even industries like distribution and things that are very disconnected from the core development team, I still consider those people game developers.
This is really interesting, guys, because some of the projects that I worked on, specifically this one I'm thinking of, you got to have good chemistry, right? You got to have good chemistry from all the people on your team. And I think you mentioned this, Kelsey, that it's really important we mentioned this about good communication, right? So what do you do about somebody that just wants their own way of doing things? How do you handle those kind of people? How do you do that? Somebody just going in a different direction than the rest of the team. How do you steer them back?
Carl, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think things like ego are very real. People that are really confident and passionate. I think that's part of the producer's job as well, is to facilitate communication in that way. Sometimes pulling people back. Someone that's a good team member isn't always the person that's the best programmer or the best artist. It's the one that can communicate well with the team and talk about their decisions openly so that the whole team's on board. It's just another one of the challenges that producers have is to make sure that the team are working together and communicating together. But sometimes you have those prodigy like people that are really amazing at what they do, and they kind of have their own way of working, and that's, you have to kind of make sure that fits in the process of how the rest of the team operates.
Yeah, I have found in my experience that when you have people like that on a team, or an individual who's just got their own ideas about how things are working, it's about keeping clarity in the target. Like if someone has really put their head down in the way that they want to do it, I'm not necessarily going to have a problem with that unless it's blocking someone else or creating problems elsewhere. And if it is, usually you're working with adults who are smart, capable people, and you can explain, hey, this is creating other issues. Is there a way we can do this that does not create those issues? And oftentimes even difficult personalities can understand that we're all on the same team trying to make the same thing, working together.
Well put. That was well put, seriously, because I think that this is really awesome information, because I work with interns sometimes, and maybe I disclose too much information, but I'm like, it's really good for them to hear this, because when they get in their first job, and I know you guys are like this, you're going to have those kind of people, and it's how you deal with them is what's really important. I think that's what makes you successful. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I kind of heard a little bit about coming from both of you, I heard Agile a little bit or something. And what kind of tools do you use for tracking development or tracking your project or even your teams? Just curious.
You can go first, Cassie. I'm interested to know what Call of Duty, what their team uses.
Yeah, me too. Why do you think I brought up the question?
Oh, you guys. We use Jira. I mean, it's pretty industry standard. We use Jira for our tracking for the most part. And then we have other tools that we use for a lot of different things. Like I will use a handful of other projects. I will use things in the Google Suite. I'll use things, possibly Smartsheets. But for the most part, it's Jira. Good old-fashioned Jira.
Yeah. At Rockerworks, we use Jira as well. We use Confluence as a documentation tool, and Jira and Confluence, just because they're both Atlassian products, they work really well together, and there's some really cool, unique functionality that you can do when you combine them both. For the art pipeline, we use ShotGrid, which used to be called Shotgun, and that's just for the art pipeline, just because that is its own unique set of challenges that Jira it's slightly different, works differently with. So we use those both of those tools, and we have ways of communicating between both of those when it kind of goes from artist to the tech team.
And it kind of leads into the next question. You mentioned daily stand-ups. Are you referring to agile development methodologies? If so, is it a hybrid? In other words, if you're using agile, is it true or what is it? I'm just curious.
I mean, I've used the word agile and Scrum. I think when it comes to a productions process, you try not stick to a methodology too strictly. You just kind of use it as inspiration. It's good to maybe have in the back of your mind, but when you're on the ground working with a team, you have to make changes and do what works well for the team. So, I mean, I guess, yeah, we work agile. We do daily stand-ups. We have like a very agile approach with the way we do sprints and things like that. So I guess it would be hybrid, but I would imagine everyone's would be hybrid to a degree. That's just my perspective.
How about you, Kelsey?
Agree. No, I completely agree. Like everywhere I've ever worked, and I only speak from my personal experience, but every studio does their own thing. It's never like strict to any system. It's what works for the team, which by definition would always be some kind of a hybrid. And I personally subscribe to the beauty of agile, that you can plan to pivot, but beyond that, it's just about making sure open communication is working.
I agree with that. Guys, guess what time it is? I think it's time. This is your moment. You've got a couple minutes. Just what do you want to tell everybody out there? I mean, I'm so amazed at you guys in your career and where you are. Just shout it out. Go for it. Just go ahead and just give some inspiring, comments, statements, thoughts. It's yours.
You can go first, Kelsey.
You always point to her.
All right. I mean, I guess honestly, I would say I've worked hard. I've had a lot of good luck. And if you are interested in working on the scale that I'm at this point, find your mentors. Find people who can help you, who can teach you and bring you along on the journey, because anybody can do it. You just have to make sure you're constantly growing.
Awesome.
Yeah. I guess what I'd like to say is if you're really passionate about making games, maybe you're a developer yourself, take part in local meetups, participate in game jams. There's a ton of international game jams popping up now that you can participate in. I think it's really important to actually take action and not just consume content all the time. You're consuming this conference and I hope that you're taking away some really good advice, but I hope that turns into actual actions, into whether it's applying for jobs or participating in game jams and building your resume, so that you actually have those experiences under your belt, because that is what will make you grow. Consuming content's great and inspiring, but I think it's important to apply that as well afterwards.
Guys, great talks, great presentations. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I have had such a great time. You both are amazing. I gotta let you go. It's the end of the day. So thank you so much, and we'll see you some other time. So bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Michael.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.